My name Richard. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, watching Mia, my wife, pack her suitcase with the kind of precision she always seemed to bring to everything. Even now, at 36, I found myself in awe of her beauty. The way the sunlight caught her auburn hair, the way her hazel eyes lit up with excitement. It was enough to make my heart skip a beat. 10 years of marriage, and she could still do that to me. Got everything you need for the conference? I asked, leaning against the doorframe, trying to keep my voice light. She glanced up at me with a soft smile. I think so. 5 days in San Diego. I want to be ready for anything. I nodded, my eyes catching on the delicate lace she was folding into her suitcase. I recognized it right away. It was part of the anniversary set I'd bought her just last month. Warmth filled my chest at the thought that she wanted to bring something so special with her. Fancy dinner plans I should know about? I teased, a grin tugging at my lips. Mia flushed a little, a faint pink coloring her cheeks. You never know. It's good to be prepared. I watched her for a moment longer. She put in extra effort that morning, I noticed. Her makeup was more carefully done than usual, her hair styled into soft waves instead of the messy bun she typically wore to work. She even spritzed on the jasmine vanilla perfume I'd given her with the lingerie. You're really going all out for this conference, I said, trying to keep the curiosity out of my tone. Bigwigs attending? She shrugged and didn't quite meet my eyes. I just want to make a good impression. The familiar scent filled the air, stirring memories of quiet, intimate moments we'd shared. I shook off the faint unease creeping in. This was Mia, my wife, my partner, the woman I trusted more than anyone. You're all set, then? I asked, forcing a cheerful note into my voice. She zipped her suitcase and wheeled it to the door, nodding. I think so. I'll call you every night, I promise. Her lips met mine in a kiss that lingered, leaving me breathless. Her fingers brushed my jaw as she pulled away. I'll miss you, she murmured softly. I'll miss you too, I replied, managing a smile as she headed down the stairs. Have fun. Don't forget my souvenir. Her laugh floated back to me, light and melodic. Of course. Love you. Love you too, I called after her, watching as she loaded her suitcase into the car. I stood at the window and waved as she turned the corner and disappeared from sight. The house felt too quiet all of a sudden, too empty. Shaking off the strange melancholy, I decided to keep busy. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat down at the dining table with a stack of quizzes to grade. I'd barely gotten started when my phone buzzed. Expecting a text from my wife to say she'd made it to the airport, I frowned when I saw an unfamiliar number on the screen. Curious, I opened the message. Your wife isn't who you think she is. Check the guest list for the La Vista Hotel. I stared at the screen, the words blurring for a moment before snapping back into focus. My stomach turned. What kind of sick joke was this? My first instinct was to delete the message and forget I'd ever seen it, but something about it clung to me. I tried to refocus on grading, but I found myself reading the same question over and over, unable to absorb a single word. Finally, I pushed the papers aside and grabbed my laptop. It wouldn't hurt to check, right? Just to put my mind at ease. My heart pounded as I pulled up the La Vista Hotel's website and navigated to the event registration page. I entered the details for Mia's conference and hit search. A moment later, the results loaded. No attendees found matching your search criteria. That can't be right, I muttered, my chest tightening. I tried again, carefully double-checking my spelling. Same result. My unease deepened. I pulled out my phone and opened our shared digital calendar. The conference was clearly marked, but there was something else underneath it. ENC Special Project? ENC? I whispered to myself. The initials nagged at me until it clicked. Eric Daniels, the new art teacher at Mia's school. They'd been working together on some cross-curricular project for months. Memories started surfacing, unbidden. The late nights she spent at school. The new wardrobe of form-fitting dresses and blouses. How she'd started angling her phone screen away when texting. No, I said aloud, shaking my head. I'm overthinking this. But doubt had already planted itself. Almost without realizing it, I made my way to her home office. I told myself I was just looking for an itinerary, just something to confirm I was being ridiculous. My search turned up nothing but lesson plans and old student projects. I was about to give up when I noticed a thick art book on the shelf with a scrap of paper sticking out. My hands shook as I pulled the book down, and the folded note fell to the floor. I unfolded it, my breath catching as I read the words scrawled in Eric's handwriting. "Can't wait for our special getaway. You're my muse and my everything." The note blurred as tears filled my eyes. I sank to the floor, clutching it in my hands as my world came crashing down around me. How could she, after 10 years of marriage, after everything we'd built together? I wasn't sure how long I sat there, the pain crashing over me like waves. Eventually, I wiped my eyes and forced myself to think clearly. I needed more information before I confronted her. I needed to be sure. I felt a strange mix of rage and resolve as I secretly set up my phone to stream live to the school's social media account. It was a precaution, a way to ensure that no matter how things played out, there would be accountability. How would Mia react when she saw me? Would she break down and confess, or would she try to lie her way out? And Eric Daniels, what excuses would he offer? Most importantly, how could I make sure they faced the full consequences of their actions? These questions swirled in my head, but one thing was certain. The answers lay ahead, at the beachfront resort where my wife thought she was safe from discovery. My jaw clenched at the thought. Not for much longer. The afternoon sun was low in the sky when I pulled into the circular driveway of the Oceana Resort. The place was beautiful. Pristine white walls, manicured gardens, the ocean shimmering in the background. Under different circumstances, I might have appreciated it. Now, it only felt like a cruel backdrop to Natalie's betrayal. My friend Sarah, ever composed, squeezed my arm as we stepped out of the car. "Remember," she murmured, "we're just a couple here for a relaxing weekend. No need to draw attention." She helps me to expose wife's infidelity. I nodded, forcing a neutral expression onto my face. Pretending was getting easier by the hour. At the reception desk, Sarah took the lead. She laughed and flirted with the concierge, spinning a story about our romantic getaway. I played my part, keeping my arm around her waist and nodding at the right moments, even though my gut twisted with every word. "Here are your key cards, Mr. and Mrs. Carter," the concierge said with a smile. "You're in room 712. Enjoy your stay." "Thank you so much," Sarah replied warmly. "I'm sure we will." We headed for the elevator, and my heart pounded harder with every step. Just a few more minutes, and I'd be face to face with Mia and Eric Daniels. I took a deep breath, trying to center myself, but the anger simmering beneath the surface was hard to ignore. "You've got this," Sarah whispered as she squeezed my hand. "I'm right here with you." The elevator dinged, and we stepped onto the 7th floor. The plush carpet muffled our footsteps as we walked down the hall. My eyes darted to each door, searching for room 714. Then I heard it, her voice. "Oh, Eric," Mia's laugh drifted through the door, soft and breathy. "Tonight's going to be our most passionate yet. I can't wait to show you what I brought." Eric's deep chuckle followed. "I bet it's that little red number, the one that drives me wild." "God, Mia, you're insatiable." "Only for you, baby," she purred. And then, as if to drive the dagger deeper, she added, "Poor Richard has no idea what he's missing out on. Sometimes I can't believe how oblivious he is." Her words killed me. White-hot rage surged through me. My fists clenched at my sides as I fought the urge to kick the door down right then and there. How dare they mock me like this? Sarah's hand on my shoulder brought me back. "Stick to the plan," she whispered. "We've got them dead to rights now." I nodded, barely, and let her guide me into our room. Once inside, I paced furiously while Sarah set up a small camera aimed at the hallway. "Okay," she said, double-checking the angle. "We're all set. How do you want to play this?" I stopped pacing and faced her, taking a deep breath. "I want to knock on their door. When Mia answers, start recording on your phone. Make it discreet." She nodded, pulling out her phone. "Consider it done. Are you ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be," I muttered, my voice hard. We stepped back into the hallway. Sarah stayed a few steps behind me, her phone held casually at her side. I raised my hand and knocked firmly on the door to 714. Muffled sounds of confusion came from inside, followed by footsteps. The door opened, and there she was. Mia stood in the doorway, wearing a silky robe, her hair tousled and her cheeks flushed. Her eyes widened in shock as she registered my presence. "Richard?" she stammered, her voice shaky. What are you doing here?" I forced a calm smile onto my face. "Surprised, darling? I thought I'd join you for this teacher conference." Her face turned ashen. Behind her, Eric appeared, his expression equally stunned. "Eric, I can explain," Mia began, but I held up a hand to cut her off. "Oh, I'm sure you can," I said, my tone icy. "I'm very curious to hear how you'll explain being here with Eric when you're supposed to be at a conference in Chicago." Panic flickered across their faces as they exchanged frantic glances. I almost laughed at how quickly their lies unraveled. "It's not what it looks like," Eric tried, but his voice lacked conviction. "Really?" I arched an eyebrow. "Because it looks like my wife is having an affair with her coworker. Please, enlighten me if I'm mistaken." Mia's eyes filled with tears. "Richard, please. Let's talk about this privately." "Why?" I snapped, my voice sharp. "You didn't seem too concerned about privacy when you were mocking me. What was it you said? That I'm oblivious to what I'm missing out on?" She flinched, realizing I'd overheard everything. Eric, standing awkwardly in nothing but boxers, tried to step forward. "Look, Richard, this is a private matter?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "You lost the right to privacy when you decided to sleep with my wife." The commotion had drawn curious onlookers from nearby rooms. Sarah stepped forward, touching my arm. "Maybe we should take this inside," she suggested softly. I nodded, brushing past Mia and Eric into their room. Sarah followed, shutting the door behind us. My tone cold and measured. "I hope you're both proud of yourselves. You haven't just destroyed our marriages, you've hurt innocent people in the process." Mia looked up, her eyes swollen and red. "Richard, please," she begged. "Don't tell anyone at the school. We'll lose our jobs, our reputations, everything." Eric nodded frantically, his voice shaking. "We'll do anything. Just please, don't expose us at work." I let their pleas hang in the air for a moment, pretending to consider them. Finally, I nodded slowly. "Fine," I said. "I won't tell anyone at the school, but I want both of you to sign written statements admitting to the affair. I need some insurance." Relief washed over their faces as they eagerly agreed. Sarah handed them the pre-prepared statements, and they signed without hesitation. "Thank you, Richard," Mia said, a glimmer of hope in her voice. "I know we can work through this somehow." I didn't respond. I collected the signed papers and walked out, Sarah close behind. That evening, I decided to take things one step further. I suggested we all have dinner together in the resort's main restaurant. Mia and Eric hesitated, but I insisted, making it clear they didn't have much of a choice. The restaurant was lively, filled with the hum of chattering guests and the clinking of silverware. We were seated at a central table, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. I played along for a while, making polite conversation with Sarah as Mia and Eric squirmed uncomfortably. After the waiter took our drink orders, I casually pulled out my phone. "You don't mind if I check my messages, do you?" I asked innocently. "I want to make sure everything's okay back home." Mia and Eric shook their heads, grateful for the break in tension. They had no idea that I just activated the live stream, broadcasting our conversation to the school's social media account. "So," I began, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "let's talk about this affair of yours. How long has it been going on?" Mia nearly spat out her water. "Richard," she hissed, glancing around. "Not here." "Why not?" I asked, my voice carrying. "I think it's time we got everything out in the open." Eric leaned forward, his face red with anger and embarrassment. "Richard, I'm warning you." "Warning me?" I interrupted with a bitter laugh. "That's rich coming from the guy who's been sleeping with my wife. Tell me, Eric, how does it feel to betray not just your own wife, but also a colleague?" Heads turned at nearby tables, and the murmurs grew louder. Mia buried her face in her hands, while Eric clenched his fists. "Please, Richard," Mia begged, tears streaming down her face. "We're sorry. We promised to end it. What more do you want from us?" I want the truth, I said, leaning back in my chair. Admit it. Right here, right now? Mia snapped, her voice shaking. Fine. Yes, we had an affair. Yes, we lied about the conference to come here together. Are you happy now? Ecstatic, I replied dryly. What about you, Eric? Anything you'd like to add? Eric glared at me. This is blackmail, he growled. No, I corrected him. This is accountability. You made choices, and now you're dealing with the consequences. Mia's phone buzzed incessantly. She pulled it out, her face draining of color as she saw the flood of notifications. Oh my God, she whispered. Richard, what have you done? I picked up my phone, ending the stream. Exactly what I said I'd do, I replied calmly. I didn't tell anyone at the school. You did all the talking yourselves. Panic set in as they realized the full extent of what had happened. Their phones were blowing up with messages from colleagues, parents, and students. The live stream had gone viral, and there was no taking it back. I sipped my water, watching as their world crumbled. Sarah placed a reassuring hand on my arm. I think I've lost my appetite, I said, standing. Enjoy your meal. Don't worry about the bill. It's on me. With that, Sarah and I left the restaurant, leaving Mia and Eric to face the consequences of their betrayal. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Let us know in the comments. When they called my name, I stood, every eye in the room following me as I walked to the podium. My heart pounded, but I kept my expression steady. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, and I owed it to myself, my students, and my community to speak it. Members of the board, fellow educators, and community members, I began, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. I stand before you today not as a victim, but as someone who believes deeply in the power of education and the responsibility we have to our students. I took a deep breath and continued, sharing details of my decade-long career at Millbrook High. I pulled out commendations and thank you notes from students, evidence of the programs I'd spearheaded, and the lives I'd touched. Teaching isn't just a job for me, I said, my voice ringing with conviction. It's a calling. Every day, I strive to inspire my students, to show them the wonders of science, and to model the importance of integrity. As I spoke, I glanced out into the audience and saw several of my current and former students. They nodded encouragingly, some even dabbing at tears. It reminded me why I was standing here, facing this moment head-on. I won't pretend that the events of the past week haven't been devastating, I admitted, my voice catching slightly. But I've always taught my students that character is revealed in how we handle adversity. I chose to face this situation with honesty and dignity, not for my sake, but for theirs. I gestured to the students present. They're watching us. They're learning from us, not just in the classroom, but in how we conduct ourselves in every aspect of our lives. When I finished, there was a moment of silence before a ripple of applause swept through the room. Eleanor Simmons, the board president, called for order and invited Mia to speak next. She approached the podium hesitantly, a far cry from her usual confident self. She glanced at me briefly but quickly looked away, unable to meet my eyes. I know what I did was wrong, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. The microphone squealed, and she flinched. After a moment, she steadied herself and went on. I made a terrible mistake, but I'm an excellent teacher. My students love me, and my art program has brought recognition to the school. Surely my personal life shouldn't affect my professional standing. The silence that followed her plea was deafening. I could see the board members exchanging glances, their expressions unreadable. Then Eric approached the podium, his demeanor brazen in contrast. He leaned into the microphone with a casual arrogance that set my teeth on edge. Look, he said, spreading his hands. What happened between Mia and me was consensual. Sure, it was a mistake, but it's not like we committed a crime. I've been an asset to this school. The PE program has never been stronger. As he went on, downplaying his actions, I noticed Mia's expression darken. She shot him a look that could have frozen fire. Clearly, his attempt to minimize their affair wasn't sitting well with her. When all three of us had spoken, Eleanor called for a recess so the board could deliberate. The room buzzed with tension, and I kept my focus forward, refusing to engage with anyone. When the board returned, their expressions were grim. Eleanor cleared her throat, her voice slicing through the anxious murmurs. After careful consideration, she began. The board has reached a decision. Mr. Richard, in light of your exemplary record and the professionalism you've displayed throughout this situation, we see no reason to take any action against you. You will retain your position at Millbrook High. A smattering of applause broke out, but Eleanor quickly silenced it with a raised hand. As for Mrs. Mia and Mr. Eric, she continued, her tone colder now, your actions have brought disrepute to this institution and violated the trust placed in you as educators. You are both placed on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending further investigation. It is likely that you will be transferred to different districts once this matter is fully resolved. The room erupted into a cacophony of voices. Mia burst into tears, and Eric slammed his fist on the table. I remained calm, nodding quietly. After the meeting adjourned, I was surrounded by well-wishers. Parents patted me on the back, colleagues offered their support, and students shared heartfelt stories of how I'd impacted their lives. One student, a shy girl named Emily, approached me with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Richard Wilson," she said, her voice trembling, "you're the reason I want to become a scientist. You showed me I could do anything if I put my mind to it." A lump formed in my throat. This was why I became a teacher. Not for recognition, but for moments like these. As I left the building, I noticed a group of parents huddled together, talking animatedly. I caught snippets about organizing a rally in my support. The news of the board's decision spread quickly, and I found myself at the center of a new kind of attention. The local paper ran a feature praising my dedication and integrity. Parents and students held a rally outside the school, carrying signs that read, "We stand with Mr. Richard Wilson and integrity matters." Meanwhile, Mia and Eric faced the fallout of their choices. They were shunned at community events, whispered about in grocery stores, and avoided like a bad omen. Mia tried volunteering at the local arts center, only to be turned away with thinly veiled disdain. Eric, on the other hand, grew combative, even getting into a shouting match with a parent at the coffee shop. As for me, I threw myself into my work, taking on new challenges, like coaching the science team. The team qualified for the national championship for the first time in school history, and their excitement reminded me why I love teaching. But amidst the pride and new opportunities, I felt a bittersweet pull. A prestigious school had offered me a job, a fresh start in a new state. At first, I dismissed it, but the weight of recent events made me reconsider. 3 months after that fateful day at the resort, I signed the final divorce papers. As I left the lawyer's office, I felt a strange sense of freedom. The chapter was closed, and I was ready to begin anew. That evening, as I packed the last of my belongings, the doorbell rang. Mia stood there, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. "Can I come in?" she asked hesitantly. I nodded and stepped aside. She moved around awkwardly, gathering her things, glancing at me as if searching for the right words. Finally, as she was about to leave, she turned to me. "Richard," she said softly, her voice trembling, "I know I have no right to ask, but is there any chance? Any at all? I've changed. I swear I have. I still love you." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the woman I'd loved for 10 years, but I also saw the woman who had betrayed me. "Mia," I said, my voice soft but firm, "I'm sorry, but no. Trust, once broken, can't be repaired. Not for me, not in this case." Tears welled in her eyes, and I felt a pang of sadness, but I stood firm. As Mia turned to leave, I stopped her. "Wait," I said, reaching for an envelope on the table nearby. "I wrote this for you. I think it might help provide some closure for both of us." Her hands trembled as she took the letter, her eyes glistening. "Thank you, Richard," she whispered, "for everything. And I'm so sorry for what I did to you." I nodded but didn't respond. As she walked out the door, I felt an unexpected sense of relief. A chapter of my life was finally closing. Turning back to my half-packed boxes, I refocused on the task at hand. The next morning was bright and clear. I stepped out onto my front porch, taking a long look at the neighborhood I'd called home for so many years. My car sat packed and ready for the long drive to my new home, but I lingered, soaking in the familiar sights one last time. Just as I was about to leave, a commotion caught my attention. Down the street, I saw a crowd approaching. To my surprise, it was my students, led by the science team, along with colleagues and members of the community. They gathered in front of my house, many holding handmade signs wishing me well. The science team stepped forward, presenting me with a scrapbook filled with photos and heartfelt messages. One by one, colleagues shared stories of how I had inspired them or made a difference in their lives. Looking out at the faces of people I'd taught, mentored, and worked alongside, a swell of emotion rose in my chest. This was why I became a teacher. It wasn't just about lessons and grades. It was about touching lives, building connections, and leaving a lasting impact. From the corner of my eye, I caught sight of Mia. She stood at a distance, watching. Our eyes met briefly, and in that moment, an entire world of unspoken words passed between us. Then, as if deciding to let it all go, she turned and walked away. I turned back to the crowd, focusing on the warmth and support surrounding me. After countless hugs, handshakes, and promises to keep in touch, I climbed into my car. As I drove away, Millbrook slowly disappeared in my rearview mirror. A mix of sadness and excitement swirled inside me. I was leaving behind the familiar, but ahead of me lay new opportunities, new challenges, and a chance to reach even more young lives. Miles down the road, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The past few months had been the hardest of my life, but I had come through stronger, more certain of who I was and what I stood for. The wounds were still fresh, but the future felt brighter with every mile I put between myself and the past. Meanwhile, back in Millbrook, Mia sat alone in her small apartment, surrounded by the clutter of boxes. In her hands was the letter I'd given her. She'd read it so many times she could probably recite it from memory, but the weight of my words still hit her each time. I'd kept my tone kind but firm. I explained why I could never take her back and wished her well in whatever came next. Tears streaked her face as she looked around her apartment, taking in the remnants of the life she'd thrown away. Pictures of happier times lined the walls, each one a painful reminder of what she'd lost. Not just me, but her home, her job, her friends, and the respect of the entire community. The sun set on Millbrook that night, casting long shadows across the quiet town. In one car, a man drove toward a new future filled with hope and possibility. If you enjoyed this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your comments below, and if you'd like to see more, make sure to subscribe.